right, everybody. No time like the present to kick things off. Hi, my name is Steve Ward. I am one of your two presenters today. Thank you very much for taking the time out this morning and this afternoon, or wherever you might be in the world. Appreciate you joining us as VikingCloud and Source Defense are going to talk to you a little bit about eSkimming and the threat and the requirements for eSkimming security controls under PCI DSS 4.01 now, 01, 4.0.1, I guess is what I should say, with the recent update to guidance from the PCI Council. We're going to be talking to you about all things eSkimming, including a detailed dive into Source Defense's approach, a behavior-based approach to application defense that VikingCloud took a look at for us. Again, my name's Steve Ward. I'm from the Source Defense end of the equation. With me today, we have Michael Amanzaid. Michael, I got that right, yes?
Yes, you did, Stephen. It's a
pleasure to be here with everyone today. So looking forward to today's session.
And Michael's from VikingCloud. I practiced the pronunciation of the name multiple times before we kicked off, so I'm glad I got that right. Michael told me to just think about Lucade, which, as you can hear from his accent, is probably why he didn't say Gatorade. But Michael's with us from Europe, from Ireland. I'm here in beautiful, sunny, and incredibly hot Washington, D.C. area. And we thank you guys for joining us from everywhere that you are. So without further ado, we'll jump in and start talking about what we're going to talk about today. I wanted to give a little bit of a background on Source Defense, kind of set the stage for you so you would understand the perch from which we sit and the expertise that we bring to the conversation. Michael will give a little bit of a background on VikingCloud here in just a second. Effectively, Source Defense is purpose-built and has been in market as a pioneer in the space of what's called client-side security. Since about 2019, we've been driving solutions to market. Kind of think of it, if you want to just dumb it down into layman's kind of terms, we're a solution that protects data at the point of capture. I think many of us on this call who've had experience in security and specifically in PCI for a long time have been thinking about the issues of protecting data in transit and data at rest. We're about protecting data at the point of capture as it's being entered into the online forms that are powering the e-commerce experience, and more broadly, that are powering all of the interactions that consumers have with you. Some of these folks on this call may not be pure play e-commerce, you may be merchant in the PCI definition, but you have other business needs that require you to interact with the client. We're about protecting all sorts of sensitive data, effectively rounding out web security. A lot of the focus on web security, has kind of been placed on the server side of the equation, hardening our infrastructure, making sure that our websites can't be used as a point of penetration, that they can't be compromised by, an adversary breaking into our websites. This is around the client side and protecting the code that runs in the browsing session of the millions upon millions of consumers that you guys do business with on a daily basis. You can kind of think about us as also being an enabler for third-party service integration, really helping your teams get the full breadth and feature functionality of the modern website experience put into the site. We'll talk a bit about it as we go along. Also consider us if you think about major projects that you've kind of been focused on. We're addressing the last mile, sort of like an unforgotten mile in third-party risk management, and I'll drive that home as we go along here. And really, we enable zero trust, and for those that have been governed by this need for software bill of materials, you can kind of think of us as doing some form of software business, SBOM at the website level. We're obviously here to talk about PCI DSS, but we address data security as a whole, data privacy and compliance across multiple, compliance regimes. As you would look at it, we touch GDPR, we touch HIPAA, we touch FFIEC. So I know some of the folks on this call probably have multiple compliance programs they need to adhere to. I think there's benefit in focusing on this, sort of data, protecting data at the point of capture across all fronts, and I'll touch on a little bit of that as we go along as well. Obviously, we have VikingCloud here today, probably the more well-known brand out of the two of us. Michael, if you want to just maybe give a little bit of background on VikingCloud, so if anybody's not that familiar with sort of where you are, who you are, what you guys do, happy to let you take that over.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. So VikingCloud, we are a global leader in providing security and compliance services for our customers. We help bridge the gap between security and compliance. From a company perspective, we actually actively monitor over 8 billion security events per day in supporting our customers, and we support over 4 million businesses with their security and their compliance programs globally. So we're well positioned in this space from a PCI compliance perspective. We are the largest QSA company globally, and we also have sat since it started on the Global Executive Assessor Roundtable, providing feedback and guidance to the PCI SSC as part of that forum. We're in the election period at the moment, so fingers crossed we may continue on that, but I'm sure we'll hopefully hear shortly on that space. But from a VikingCloud perspective, that's who we are and how we support the industry.
You got my vote, Michael, and it's not just because we're working together, but I think you guys are doing a really good job leading the charge in the community, and we thank you for that. Maybe let's talk a little bit about why you're talking today with us, and sort of the work that we asked you guys to do for us.
Yes, certainly. So one of the things that we've had is there's been a change in standards. So from version 3.21 to version 4, as part of that, there was some new requirements that have been put in place, especially around protecting the customer's browser as well as the payment pages that are utilized as part of the ecosystem. So one of the bits that we were very happy about was being able to help support Source Defense when we were asked to look at their product solution in this space that really helps organizations meet the compliance requirements for these two requirements from that point. So really, when we engaged with Source Defense from a partnership perspective, one of the things that we did was we sat down and we said, right, well, we're gonna look at the solution, look at what does it do, how does it do it, and then off the back end of that, we produced a white paper so that the industry and other QSA companies as well as other regulatory bodies can also understand how the solution works and how it can help meet the compliance requirements as well as other security elements as part of the solution.
So there you go. That's the background on why we are friends now, and happy to be friends. One thing I wanted to talk about is that it's not that VikingCloud stands alone in their involvement with the council. Source Defense is a PPO, what's referred to as a PPO. It's a principal participating organization. We're heavily engaged, heavily involved. You'll see us at the community meeting coming up very shortly in North America. You'll see us in Europe. We will likely be in Asia. We were last year in Kuala Lumpur, so we were at all three. We've been working a lot over the course of the last year and a half, 2 years, really to help the community understand the problem and understand, solutions and approaches, to the problem. We've developed a bunch of free support tools along that pathway. We've probably spoken with, I would say, at least 200 of the QSACs, multiple, 1,000 plus of QSAs. As you might imagine, similar number of merchants along this pathway. And we've developed a bunch of tools that, as we go along, my colleague Scott will throw in the chat some links to things that can help you, whether or not you engage with us as a partner, because we feel a real, commitment and responsibility to help advance the cause here. So we've got some tools that can help you understand scoping and really understand, what's in scope, what's not, what you should be thinking about, and the difference between compliance and your requirements there and, the overall sort of security intent of things. So you can definitely, engage us for support there. We've got guidance on build versus procure, some steps that you should follow to evaluate how you want to approach this internally. We are happy to do team education and ask me anything sessions. We do a lot of those. And so, we understand this is sort of like a dynamic multi-resource kind of approach to things here. If you need help bringing everybody together, getting them on the same page, we can help you there. We've got a free tool that we'll give you a link to as we go along that can really help you with the preliminary assessment. And we're happy to talk to your QSAs at a working session. And we do a 90-day action plan. So there's a lot of stuff that you can get from Source Defense without having to, become a customer or client and engage in that partnership. And we want you to avail yourselves of that as we go along. So, all right, with the introductions out of the way and with respect to kind of moving things along, I wanted to talk here a little bit about the why behind the focus on eSkimming security. And I thought it would be good if we gave a little bit of a timeline of how we transitioned from, a sole focus on data in transit, data at rest, to now this need to protect data at the point of input. And it's kind of an interesting timeline when you look at it. Michael and I were discussing this, not too long back, and it kind of provoked a lot of thought. If you look at the sort of decade from 2005 to 2015, and now we're kind of aging ourselves because it feels like it was yesterday. But that was really the shift from card present to card not present, becoming the target. The controls that were put in place, the shift to chip and pin, across that time frame really moved the needle for fraud and for fraud actors and for cyber criminals, and changed the game for them. I think also coupling that with a lot of the advances that we made, in PCI compliance and moving the industry forward made things a lot harder. As bad guys do, they don't sit around, they innovate. And, in 2016 is really where you saw the dawn of this mage cart problem, as many of you might have heard it referred to, eSkimming as it's referred to within PCI DSS 4.0.1. This is the dawn of that era of theft through the website, theft of, through key logging and scraping, really the sort of emergence of this new scourge. And it kind of continued, saw high profile attacks, been in the news. Absolutely never, ever blame, any of those that were victimized in these things, but they are good case studies. I think we've had a lot of people in the past, bring these case studies and open up the kimono and really help the community. BA, Ticketmaster, some very, very high profile companies with a lot of money at their disposal to advance the security cause still fell victim because there wasn't really a lot of commercially available support to address this problem, right? The bad guys innovate. It takes some time for vendors to innovate against that. If you look at kind of the timeline with where, Source Defense came to market, it really is, kind of in this gap here between 16 and 18, we're doing technological development. And it wasn't until 19 that we really were able to bring, a commercially available, viable solution to market. And one of the things I wanted to point out that happened in 19 was sort of the bridging. And I mentioned earlier, like, sort of the impact across compliance structures or regimes, the bridging from what would be a PCI oriented event in today's world, right? Card data theft, right? To, a GDPR event. For the fact that European data was not protected and was stolen. There's the first really major GDPR fine occurred against BA. It was right at the dawn of the pandemic. $200 million was what the initial levy was. Luckily, that got really negotiated down because of the pressures that the global transportation and airline industry were facing because of the pandemic. Ended up still being about $20 million, which is still a very, very a material loss to any organization. So we saw a lot of focus, right, and a lot of headlines about these high-profile attacks, about the threat of mage cart that kind of dissipated, and it disappeared from at least the headlines because of all the things that happened in the shift when the world changed, right? Ransomware started becoming a scourge. You saw a lot of third-party supply chain issues emerge, Cassia, SolarWinds, et cetera, but not really, kind of sucking the wind out of the conversation of this more retail-oriented or, sort of consumer-oriented kind of fraud. At the same time, though, we saw this exponential shift, or the fire being fueled because of the pandemic, and growing the e-commerce experience a lot faster than was predicted. And so, as the news headlines are focused elsewhere, the rush to online is becoming something that's become a reality. The bad guys didn't go away. High profile breaches continued. The adversaries actually shifted. That it didn't go away from large merchants in the level 1 type category, but they shifted, started hitting level 3s, level 4s, targets of opportunity, big nets that they could cast, hit 10,000 websites at once kind of thing. And it really became a problem. Well, PCI and the council, with the vision and the foresight, said, we've got to do something about this problem. That's where DSS 4.0 was introduced, right, in that 2022 timeframe. Obviously, giving organizations such as yours an opportunity, to sort of absorb the change and, future dating requirements. The requirements under 643 and 1161, were future dated to March 2025. But the threat persists, right? And that's one, kind of part of the dialogue I want to have around security versus compliance as we go along. I think what we're going to need to recognize is, while we've added new controls and new focus, it takes some time to steer a massive ship. In 2023, one of the stats was there were 100 million cards available online, with the vast majority being card not present, which indicates, stolen, through e-commerce type activities, right? So the threat, is there, it's underlying. We're seeing in our own research, and this will be some research that we disclose in a talk that we'll be giving alongside Verizon at PCI North America, a massive increase in the digital supply chain. So the threat landscape's getting bigger, the opportunity's getting bigger. We're moving the ship. We're trying to get better controls in place. But, at the same time, we're kind of looking at this 2025 PCI mandated deadline. We need to recognize, and this is something we need to keep in mind writ large about the difference between security and compliance. We're always going to have to innovate. We're always going to have to act faster. It's tremendous that we now have a mandate to force us to look at these controls and do something about the problem. But we always need to make sure we're looking at what compliance is. Compliance is hygienic. It sort of normally and naturally follows trend. It doesn't stay in front of trend. So I use that to say, it's good that we're getting to this point, and we need to be at this point, but we need to make sure that we don't lose sight of what the bad guys will do next, and where they will go next, and the way that the threat evolves, and the way that the evolution of our business strategies opens up risk and threat, and how we always have to constantly be thinking ahead of the game to try and check this stuff down, so our organizations and the consumers that we serve don't fall victim. To sort of drive that point home, these attacks are happening every day, and they take on different flavors. This is a quote directly pulled from Visa's biannual threat report back in mid-half of 2022, basically saying the targeting of e-commerce platforms and the third-party code integrations, right, and that's what we're really trying to protect with 643 and 1161, are among the most common tactics, utilized by threat actors conducting these attacks. They're targeting this supply chain, the third-party service providers that make up the supply chain with high frequency and exhibiting interest in payment account data and PII. Okay, these couple of pieces right over here were just ripped from the recent headlines, and I want to focus, predominantly on this polyfill use case, or this what's happened with this thing called polyfill.io that was, really, impacted multiple millions of websites just in the last couple of weeks. It is, an example, I think, of what's happened in terms of the way we've changed our development from a code perspective, our reliance on open source, our reliance on third parties, and a driving example of the risk behind it. Polyfill.io was an open source project that was used to provide a service inside browser that can deal with legacy or outdated browsers and overcome the compatibility issue with the modern website. This was in place, it was used, it was integrated into code bases, basically pulled from a CDN, this polyfill.io CDN, and that CDN and the code base fell into the hands of Chinese adversaries. And they were using, the reliance on that open source and its, sort of broad reach to effectively conduct redirect attacks, and to do key logging and to steal PII. And so I think that drives home, sort of the fundamental issue behind why this code integration, is a problem, why these third parties are a problem, and leads us to a nice transition to kind of understand how these attacks happen. Okay. These attacks happen because the website is powered by JavaScript. These attacks happen because JavaScript is basically everything, everywhere, all at once. In other words, JavaScript is in place across probably 97% plus of all websites, and it can perform any action and behave in any way that it wants on any site where it's running. And that leads to, the fact, because there's no native security controls, these attacks like Magecart, eSkimming, form jacking, credential harvesting, etc. Right? And so, what is that? What are you talking about, Steve? Like, how does this code like naturally just open things up? Well, we've moved from brick and mortar to everything digital, right? We, in the process, have advanced the capabilities of the website from static to incredibly dynamic. We're driving this great user experience, right? The user demands experience. I want more. It's like Veruca Salt, from Willy Wonka. For those, I want it and I want it now. And it's multimedia, and it's rating services and reviews that people want to read, and it's all of the social integrations and our ability to follow users if they abandon shopping cart or if they go elsewhere to keep our brand in front of them. It's chat bots and AI. It's user targeting and all the rich analytical data that we need that really fuels our ability to figure out how to bring products to market and how to advance the revenue goals of the organization. So all of these things are happening. They need to be there, and it's increasing. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger in terms of the footprint. So much so that like 82% of the code that's running on your website isn't your code. And when it's not your code, and when you don't have native security controls in place, and when we haven't adopted widespread security controls as an industry, that creates problems. So like the widgets, the dynamic forms, the orders and payments, the social sharing, all those things I just mentioned, they're all potential attack pathways if an adversary can compromise them. Okay. And, we need this stuff so much so that, and this will be updated, but our last data on it was, we were seeing an average of about 12 third-party scripts per site. So 12 third-party partners, or think of it like this, your supply chain, your digital supply chain has 12 partners engaged. Those partners call on partners. So these are sort of like the underlying, or the extension of your supply chain. If we want to think about what happened with the HVAC vendor being breached, that led to the famous Target incident. A downstream partner of your partner is also a risk, right? And you would think, well, okay, cool. Like, we've done so well at, sort of segregating environments and such, that we wouldn't run any of this stuff on sensitive pages. Actually, quite the opposite. These scripts and these partners are available across the site, so much so that like the same average that we saw was also on sensitive pages, i.e. in payment pages, i.e. in pages where PII and other forms of data are collected. And so we'll update these stats with the report that we'll be releasing and with the speech at PCI North America, but it has grown exponentially in terms of this reliance on these partners. One thing, quick aside before I go on, to just point out, we're talking a lot about the threat and the risk of a breach, and how adversaries might get in, how adversaries might use your partners to steal data. It's important to understand that the advanced capabilities of these scripts that are running, and all of those things that I mentioned, like the analytical capabilities and the ability to follow people around and offer products at the abandoned shopping cart and things of that nature. So that's all creating a concern around just a benign state, data privacy and the control of data privacy mandated information. And so there's a number of examples that are out there where there's, if you want to call it leakage, this leakage is kind of happening, where it's sensitive data that organizations didn't realize a partner was getting a hold of. That partner gets a hold of that data is used and mined, and bad thing, because that data never should have been shared with that partner. That's happening a lot more too. So think of it not only as a security concern, and why we should manage, the scripts that are running on our site and control them, but also think of it as a broader bleed into some of the other data privacy mandates that you might need to adhere to given your business and what you do. So, what can scripts do and what can bad guys do with these scripts? Should they compromise them? Well, I'll start first by just saying everything that's on this slide right here, all these things: change page content, record keystrokes, add content like images or text or video or form fields, track behavior, capture data and share it, redirect to other areas. All of these things, which sound like malware, right, are happening in the design of these scripts natively. Okay. And it's for all those reasons we just discussed, right? Like I want to know, I might want to show a product based on user selection. I might want to add images or, select people who just bought this have also bought that. I might need to have, sort of an evolving form experience where I'm adding fields based on what I previously knew about someone. I'm looking at where they're on the website, monitoring their behavior and tracking clicks and looking at Hotjar and things of that nature. I'm sharing data with my teams. I'm taking users and pushing them in other places on the website. Every single one of those behaviors is actually designed into these scripts that you're running on your website. So the bar of compromise for the adversary is incredibly low because they don't have to write the code, right? In a lot of cases, they just have to break in and then redirect the natural performance of the code, to command and control infrastructure that they own, right? So think about that. Like these are things that are happening, regardless of whether or not there's a compromise. And so the compromise becomes very low, so much so that these toolkits that are for sale on the dark web are like $1,000. It's really, really barrier of entry low, not a lot of expertise required. I put some asterisks next to these things: changing paid content, redirecting users, adding form fields, because I'm going to come back to it as we talk a little bit about the difference between security and compliance and the difference between protecting payment pages and flows as we get deeper into the conversation. So, all right. Trying to talk fast to keep us on track. This is, kind of where I'm going to hand some things over, and we're going to talk a little bit about what the requirements are. There's a new gap to fill, as is mentioned, as you should know. There are a lot of people behind the ball on getting it done. We should get moving on that. Michael, I want to hand it over to you. Maybe talk about what these requirements are, what they mean, and some of the guidance you might want to provide to folks that are on this call.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Stephen. So if we look at this specific area of the standard, there's really two main requirements. 643, which is around understanding the scripts that are utilized, making sure that you've got an inventory of approved scripts, making sure the integrity of the scripts that are running are correct, but also most importantly that the scripts that are actually running on your site are actually authorized. The second area is requirement 1161, and this is to make sure that you're able to understand if there's been a change or tamper on the website. And in order to do that, you must make sure that you're monitoring the website as well as being able to alert as well as block any malicious scripts on any of your payment pages on that piece. So I would say with this piece, looking at the standards, if we look at version 321, this is a new PCI 4.0 requirement that's come in with the new version of the standard, on that front. And we are seeing that these requirements as well are evolving requirements. So that means that they come into force and are best practice until the 31st of March 2025. However, with all approaches to changes in standard, right, one of the reasons why they've been put in the standard is so that organizations can understand them. It is a new area for compliance in this area, given the new threat landscape that the industry is dealing with. And so one of the reasons as well why they're evolving requirements is so that organizations can take a proactive approaches to making sure that they can meet those compliance requirements as part of their programs. So I think that's really the compliance landscape, Stephen, for everyone.
Yeah. So, I'm going to transition the conversation a little bit into a couple of things: roles, responsibilities, and the difference between compliance and security. Okay. As it relates to kind of like the guidance on roles and responsibilities. Michael, this is sort of, I think, the new 4.0.1, you know, that's a mouthful. I got so used to saying 4.0, now I got to add the .1. But, you know, the guidance or clarification, I think is what they call it, right? You know, that was released maybe 2, 3 weeks ago, about who's got to do what and who's got to do what based upon the scenario that you're in. Can you maybe speak to kind of, you know, what's been said there and how that might impact? I think on this call, we probably have a good mix of merchants. We've got some TPSPs. That's always a hard word for me to get out as well. You know, some gateway folks, etc. And I think there's, with the clarification and emphasis on, you know, the fact that it's not just on the merchant's shoulders to do something, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think understanding the landscape and you know, everyone's responsibility within the landscape is important. And so I think one of the bits that from a compliance standards perspective is every organization, right, you know, given that with the assumption that they have got, you know, a internet footprint, they are responsible, right, you know, from a compliance perspective for ensuring that these compliance requirements are met. Now, if there is a third-party service provider or payment page that is being utilized as part of the solution, then the requirements within inside that actual third party's payment page will be the responsibility of that third party's compliance. Dependent on the third party service provider and the services that they are doing and providing for the merchant, there may be obligations where that third party is going to be monitoring and fulfilling requirements 643 and 1161 for the merchant on their behalf. So it is important to understand that, you know, from a compliance perspective, you know, the merchant is responsible for these requirements. If they've got a third-party service provider that is fulfilling those requirements on their website, then, you know, that is obviously their responsibility to make sure that their third party is providing those services for the merchant's compliance, but also understanding, you know, the line of you know, the merchant's website versus the actual payment, the actual third-party payment page, which, if that's being provided by a third-party payment processor, then that would be covered under their compliance certification for the services that they are performing. So as part of this landscape, it's really important because it can get a little nuanced as to making sure with the multiple different third parties that may be providing services to this e-com platform and therefore to the consumer, which part of compliance falls with each entity that is within the supply chain.
Yeah, the nuance is very nuanced, right? I think there's what it begs is a need to have a conversation and to have it now. I think you know, with the folks running the website, how it works, what's going on, what form of approach is being taken, I would encourage it involves an upfront QSA conversation. I think that what I've seen with a lot of our clientele is it's like a 50-50. Some, you know, feel like they engage their QSA, you know, only at the point where, and a lot on this call may not use a QSA, but if you are, you know, at the point where it's the rock, right, where, you know, we got to get into the process. I think don't underestimate the value of them as consigliaries and as folks that can help guide, because they're the ones who are going to be looking at what you've done and making sure you've done it right. Ask them up front, get moving, get that conversation going, and talk to your TPSP. And, you know, really, that's sort of on those, you know, engagement tools that I mentioned. You know, get the conversation moving with your teams now, because there's nuance. It's very nuanced, and you're going to have to, you know, figure out who's got what and who needs to do what.
Yeah.
You know,
I think the other piece that I would just add, and we have seen it come up in the industry where, you know, when merchants are looking for, third-party service providers to help them in this space, understanding in their selection process that third party is going to help them with requirement 12.9 to make sure from a contractual perspective that they will be able to support them with supporting evidence for their compliance programs as part of that process is definitely key. We have seen it where merchants have selected to use I'm going to say third party, not a third party service provider, right? And unfortunately, when they have gone to ask for their help and support in meeting their compliance obligations, that was not in the contract, and that caused the merchant problems. So it is important as part of the selection process that merchants are mindful of those requirements as part of selecting their third-party service providers or TPSPs.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, my take, my bully pulpit moment to sort of tell you guys why I think, we need to think about this broader than what the mandate, dictates, and more about all the things we talked about in terms of the capabilities of the adversary, right? I think that there's a fundamental difference between, making sure that we stay compliant and making sure that we understand what the bad guy can do. There are a lot of things over here. Well, I fully redirect my checkout, to my e-commerce provider. I should be good. You need to understand that, again, when we talk about some of the capabilities of, compromised script, the bad guy can get in the middle of that handshake. And so if you're running scripts upstream in the checkout process, that redirect could be hijacked and could be taken, to what looks to be, or is a spoofed, provider site, right? All scripts are going to be blocked on payment pages. I should be good, right? That's definitely an approach that's happening now. Okay, and I think that's a good practice. That may break a lot of the functionality of what your web team needs that site to do, and so that's something that should be considered as well. But again, it's upstream from the payment page where compromise can happen. I fully outsourced. We segregated the environment. I should be totally fine. We only run first party scripts. That's one that I've heard a number of times. We talk a lot about the third party script because that's really where a lot of the compromise comes from. But must understand that this mandate requires management of all script. Does not delineate between first and third. It includes first party. I think that was actually part of the guidance that was provided in the .1 update, was to say, hey, no, this involves your own script as well. Now, as we've pointed to, that's getting smaller and smaller of a footprint because you're outsourcing all this stuff. But make sure you're keeping that in mind, right? Those first party scripts, are something that need to be looked at. So, full stop. I think what we need to do is we need to recognize, at least my argument is that, the page should really mean flow. And why do I mean that? Because compromised scripts anywhere in the site can be used to change that checkout process. So I put those asterisks next to those things. Changing page content, right? Putting a button that doesn't exist, but it exists for that consumer. Click here to check out. Is a great hijack point. We've got a blog that'll be out next week that talks about that and shows that in the real world. Adding content, even adding form fields. This form doesn't normally require anything close to PII. It definitely never asks for credit card data, but the bad guy can make it do so. And then redirecting visitors to websites under the attacker control. So when I look at it and I think, what is the definition under 4.1 around payment page? They use some attempts to really make it happen. It gets a little jumbled in my head, but it could be a single document or instance. It can be a document or a component displayed in an inline iframe or an iframe within a non-payment page, or it can be multiple documents or components, each containing one or more form elements contained in multiple inline frames within a non-payment page. So these non-payment page things, I think, are important to underline in terms of their definition, right? Because it may not be what you think of as a payment page. So you should look at that scope and sort of dig in there. But again, like I would argue, it's not page that's important in the definition, it's payment. And so, any page that's understood by the consumer to be part of the checkout, you know, from add to cart onward really should be, you know, what you're thinking about from at least a security control perspective, because there can be these addition of cart capture forms by the adversaries, because they can put bogus form fields and redirects that can lead to key logging data theft. So if I'm the consumer, right, the point where I'm most easily going to be duped into, you know, this type of attack is not maybe necessarily when I'm browsing, right? It's when I'm taking action, add to cart, go to checkout, those types of things where you think about where those pages lie, where those buttons lie on your website. You really should be thinking about script control. And, you know, I mean, I would just advocate, because there's such a fundamental, like, it's not a big gap between pages and site wide. I would say think secure, think security, think adversarial's next step, you know, think big picture, think page, right? Michael, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. You know, and it's something you and I had a couple, you know, conversations on. If not, and we want to keep things moving, we can do so as well.
No, I think the piece there, there's always the as you said, there's always the two different lenses that you're looking at it from, right? So you've got the security first approach, right? And so what we're seeing is that, the bad actors, are trying to first of all get a foothold, right? And then from that, then explore to see how far they can get, what can they change, what can they manipulate, how can they, utilize that to extract, different forms of data, and collect different forms of data from through their malicious techniques. The second element on it is around the actual compliance elements and responsibilities that different organizations have. So in order to make sure that you're fulfilling those, we've definitely seen as well, I would say, a shift in the level of complexity inside this landscape. And we do also see that there is a tendency, right, because websites are so dynamic nowadays, have got so many different moving parts, and need to, from a content point, because they are really delivering, content first, and then the payment element is then I don't want to say supporting, but a secondary, or follow-on element off the back end of that platform that needs to happen in order for the transaction to complete or procurements to be made. But because there's so much level of complexity, we've also seen as well where organizations try to remove remove elements out of their compliance program that don't fall into scope. We have also seen some organizations try to minimize the compliance impact of these very advanced, dynamically moving websites as part of as part of compliance programs. So what we are definitely seeing off the back end of that, right, is that compromises do and have happened in this space. But it is really important that they are included appropriately as part of your compliance program, but also that that the approach that is taken to these platforms is a security first approach. And we see for organizations that take that, then the compliance requirements actually come out of their security first program for these platforms.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Right, by like raising the water with the security first mindset, compliance tends to follow fairly easily, and it tends to just be sort of a byproduct. Right, let's get to the security first. That's what most of our goals here are on the call. I know there's some GRC specialists here, but we're working hand in hand. We're all trying to do one thing: minimize risk to the organization, minimize risk to our consumers, stop the bad guys, right? So think about it with that approach first, and everything sort of becomes easier on the back end.
The other piece I would just add as well, Stephen, is we have definitely seen from a society perspective about how from a society point we are so dependent on our technology footprints, right? As societies, and I'm talking the global society. We're also seeing regulations outside of the ones that we've discussed. Actually, they are focusing on not only the security element, but also the resiliency element of these sites, right? To make sure that, that they can continue to operate, that, you know, society can continue to utilize them to procure services, to procure payments, to provide those services that society needs, and, you know, is much more dependent on today than, you know, if we go back 10, 15, you know, 20 years. So, you know, we've seen, you know, as we've mentioned multiple times already, you know, the PCT IDSS has taken, you know, steps, you know, to include those in the standard as future dated requirements, you know, to help, you know, protect this space. But we're also seeing other regulations that are actually going, you know, into other areas, and that's around resiliency and continuity of providing these services as well. So it's definitely an area that is going to continue to mature and evolve as society continues to be dependent on these platforms.
Yeah, I think it's a good transition into sort of like the evolution of these platforms and some of the guidance and some of the approaches maybe to be considering when you're getting into this conversation. Build versus procure, that's always an internal, you know, struggle. You know, how easy is it going to be to put things together, you know, on my own versus see commercially available? You know, I think that that's where we kind of, you know, come into maybe some of what has been said or, you know, provided as guidance. You know, from my end of things, you know, it is, I think, for you guys to consider the piecing all together. 643 and 1161 is going to require exactly that, piecing things together. You have a requirement for documentation and for internal process documentation, like, you know, the review of the inventorying, the justification requirements that are underneath the standard. You know, these are all sort of like you know, process-oriented management and documentation that you're going to need to build tools around. You've got obviously the requirement to look at the HTTP headers, you know, at least a frequency, you know, of 7 days, maybe more, depending upon your risk posture. You've got the requirement to alert, to block. You know, all of these things you're going to have to kind of hack together in a DIY kind of fashion. And there's some provided guidance on ways you can approach that with things like SRI and CSP, sub-resource integrity and content security policy, called out, that I think are, you know, interesting, you know, potential approaches. They're traditional approaches that have been relied upon. But I think that, you know, you used the word dynamic a number of times, and I don't think we really have addressed that significantly in the call. These scripts, you know, are changing to the tunes of thousands of times, you know, on an annual basis. They are dynamic in nature. They move, they shift, they change based on the responsive nature that they're designed to do, you know, based on user behavior. And, you know, CSP has been one that people said, okay, well, I'll just build a content security policy. I can control the script behavior at that point in time. But it really kind of like is, you know, painting you into a corner that I don't think necessarily is an easy corner to, you know, defend from. And because it really relies more on like a whitelisting and a binary yes, no, black, white, you know, kind of approval of a script. You guys took some look at that, you know, on the VikingCloud end, you know, in the white paper. You called out a few things to just, you know, to be concerned about. I don't think you're picking necessarily on CSP. I think some of this really relates writ large to approaches, you know, from any compliance, you know, kind of approach. Do you want to maybe speak to some of the thoughts there, Michael?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think one of the pieces that we'll say is, look, whenever we look at and evaluate these items, we always evaluate them, you know, against the standard. But we also want to make sure that, you know, as part of being compliant, that organizations have got to be able to make sure that they can, you know, meet the controls, but also maintain the controls, right, as part of their compliance program. So one of the pieces when we were just looking at the different ways, right, when we were evaluating, you know, source, defense, protect, we were looking at it against, you know, Steve, as you said, you know, some of the industry baseline approaches into manage this, and so some of the areas that we highlighted that just need to be looked into, you know, as part of that was to make sure that, you know, if you are going to be using, you know, a CSP, then you've got to make sure that you're actually able to manage the level of complexity and the level of change, right? And that therefore comes to making sure that there's enough resources to be able to manage that, and that they also need to have the correct technical expertise as part of that. The other part as well is that with the one of the things that you don't want to have happen is have under or over blocking, right? So making sure that that content security policy is dialed in correctly, right? Is something that would takes continuous maintenance to make sure that as your sites and as your content and items change, that you don't that you don't inadvertently over or under block as part of that content security policy. And then that does then fold into the third one, right? Is that if you're going down that approach, right, making sure that you can continue to maintain that, monitor it, and that it is current and effective as as this part of your technology landscape adjusts and evolves in line with your business. So I think these are the considerations that when we were looking at established measures when then looking at the source defense protect solution that we thought were mindful to call out as part of a baseline understanding as part of these solutions for people when they were reading the white paper.
Look at that. It was almost like on cue reading the white paper. I flicked to this. So if you got a QR code, I don't know if that's your preferred method of downloading this, but you can point your phone at it if you so choose. Scott, my colleague's going to throw a link to the white paper in the chat right now, so you guys can all access that. It goes deeper into that conversation. It goes deeper into obviously what was looked at and reviewed, in the scope of the engagement. Definitely, avail yourself of that. I want to be mindful of time. I know we've got, I have some more considerations that I wanted to give related to, these approaches. I'm starting to see questions come in where we've got probably about 10 minutes left. I'll give you just a quick primer. Michael, I was going to have you go through kind of like the examples that you used in terms of the way you tested, the source defense platform. I think we'll skip that just to get to some of these questions and open more questions for the field, and just encourage everyone to just grab that white paper. And what we'll make sure we do in follow up to all registrants and attendees here, we're going to send a link to the webinar recording so you can share that. And then we'll make sure we send another link as well, to the white paper so you have it. And so that way it gives at least the last 5 minutes here to, talk about things. But what you'll see when you look at what, VikingCloud had done, they looked at what we call source defense protect. We have two different approaches. We have an outside looking in, kind of approach. That's a detection. And then the onus is on you to build in the alerts and the alert response into your traditional security operations response. The protection solution, or source defense protect, is natively a control system for the scripts running on your website. So think of it as we become basically the traffic cop for all JavaScript that your partners want to run, and we contain in a bit of a sandbox what that script is able to do. We don't let the website break. It's deployed very simply. This is not like gear you got to rack and stack. This is 2 lines of code, and effectively we become the protection first approach where you don't have any alerts to respond to. There's nothing to monitor. We do it inherent and native to the tech. So I want to jump to the Q&A, okay? Just because I want to make sure we get to it. I will say one of the other things I'll ask Scott to put a link to right now is this assessment tool that we have, basically a bit of freeware. So Scott, if you can throw that in there. And then I think I put our email addresses here. Yeah, put our email addresses here. We do have ways to help you on the source defense side, right? The scoping support, all that kind of stuff. But there's Michael's email. There's my email. We're here to answer questions that don't get answered today. So just drop us a line. And now, I'm gonna pop into the Q&A and pull some of this out so we get a little bit more engaged. If you guys have questions, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, I was just going to say, whilst you're looking up the questions and pulling out which ones we're gonna go do first, I just want to say, we do have a team, at VikingCloud that does look at applications and solutions and is able to produce these white papers. So we were really, when we saw these new evolving requirements, and then we were approached, we saw that this could do lots of good for the industry in this new area. So we do hope that you all find value of that white paper. And we've also done this for other solutions and products covering different areas as well. So just more of an awareness that if you need help in this area or any of the other areas that we've spoken about, that as Steve said, our email addresses are there, and please do reach out. We're here to help.
Fantastic. Yep. Make sure you got that. Okay. Here's a question. I didn't see anything about blocking in 11.6.1. Where did you find that in the requirement? So that should be there, right? Alert and block on malicious activity. I used to have a handy dandy printed out in front of me for the specific language. Michael, do you have that anywhere? The specific call out in 11.6.1? I don't know if you've got the actual language in front of you. I'm looking to see if I have it, but it should be there. It's in there like ragu. On that question in particular, drop me a line and I'll shoot you a note back with the actual poll from the mandate. Okay. Making sure you still got me, Michael. I don't want to have crapped out on audio here right at the last minute.
No, I'm still.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. Okay, so and this is one. Is there any way that the SD offering will be made available to customers within the VC online PCI portal? We don't have a relationship to that type at this point in time. What I would say is, our relationship has been one of asking VikingCloud to take a look, to validate, our approach, to give their guidance and their thought. It's the preeminent QSAC in the world. And anything further from that is not really in place. So video and slides be available later? Yes, absolutely. We'll get that done. Anything super substantive that we didn't get to here, guys, that are still on the call? If you want to throw it across, some of this stuff is a little bit more mundane. We'll definitely follow up. We will get you, as I mentioned, a link to the white paper, so you can download that. Anything that's from the perch that we're sitting on right now, you're gonna walk away going, I did not get that answered, I'm not clear, I don't understand. That would be a great time right now in the next minute or so that we have to throw some questions out. I wish we had the Jeopardy theme song. That would be awesome if we had that right now. Scott, you'll have to make note of that for the next one. We'll have to do the Jeopardy countdown thing. Scott has put the VikingCloud white paper link, the portal link for the PCI dashboard, and the 90-day action plan links all inside that chat window. So feel free to hit those. Going once and twice. All right, well, I apologize that we had to kind of cut short on the guts of the review piece, but again, it's all in there. Michael, I really appreciate you taking the time out. I know you'd expressed concern where we're going to get through it all. You were right, I was wrong, missed it by about 8 minutes. But always leave them wanting more. It's getting towards your evening there in Ireland, so you have a great evening, Michael. Thank you for the time. Thank everybody here for taking the time out. Hopefully this gets things a little bit more clear for you. We will follow up. You feel free to follow up with us, and let's fight the good fight together.
Thank you.